they're out. And they're staring at me. I was hoping they were gone, but it's not looking good. We'll see. Trying to hide behind that tree, but I see, there he is. Holy shit. Good morning. This is Bill from Auto House of Naples and Curious Cars on a rather, it's a very nice Florida Friday, I have to say. I apologize for not getting another video up this week. Cars are tough to find right now. They really are. I don't know if it's the COVID, I don't know if it's production, I don't know what really the problem is, but coming up with cars has been a pain in the ass, and I'm not reviewing cars that I'm going out and finding for the most part that people own. What I'm doing is sort of buying and selling these things. So the cars that I review also happen to be cars that I'm going out and buying. So that does sort of make it a little bit more difficult in terms of coming up with stuff. I don't know if I should change that or not, but probably. I've gotten a few tips from people, and I do appreciate it. In fact, a couple of them have come to fruition. We're getting in a very low mileage 85 Oldsmobile sedan soon, which was a tip line vehicle, so thank you for that, and I really appreciate it. And this one was not. Actually, this is a customer I had for many years. I don't really sell cars anymore because selling cars drove me completely insane. But I still do have a bunch of customers from the days when I did, and this was one of them. Very nice guy. I had a Studebaker a few years ago that came from him, and now he's getting on, he's moving up, he's in his 90s, he's stopped driving, and as such is parting with his beloved Lexus SC. So I was kind of, I was lucky enough to get it. The goats, they were out this morning. I don't know where they are now. Hopefully they're gone. If they come back, God, I don't know. Hopefully Peter's back there feeding them, and they'll be happy enough with that. So I hadn't seen them in a while. I thought they were dead, but apparently they're not. So that kind of sucks. I'm also using a gimbal for the first time because of comments in the comment section. And let me tell you, man, this thing weighs a friggin' ton. I mean, it weighs a ton. I can't believe that people actually carry these things around. And I'm hoping that, in this incarnation, it sucks enough so that I can stop using it, because, god damn, I'm going to have arms like Popeye if I keep rolling with this thing. But anyway, so weather decent, but it's going to be hot later. It's going to be hot again and again and again. It's not getting any better. This is the end of it. The good weather has come and gone, and maybe we get a few more mornings eked out of it like this one, but otherwise, I drove home yesterday, and the sun came through the windows like a friggin' laser beam. Great air conditioning in this car, and still, when I had the window cracked, it came through onto my legs, and, before I knew it, I was at 140 degrees below the waist, and, not from going to a strip club, just normally, and it sucked. So here it comes. Here comes the weather, and what the hell are you going to do about it? I might try to find a way to get out of Dodge this summer, but I doubt it. I see a cat over there behind the hedges. Hopefully he stays. That looks like the big one, too. That looks like Cujo. It's funny how a lot of Peter's animals are named Cujo. Anyway, we're going to jump right into this thing. This is a Lexus SC400, now forgotten car from the 90s, at least by some people. You may know the Lexus Lc500. That came out in 2017. It's a $100,000 Lexus sedan. Very, very handsome. By the way, also designed at the Kelty Design Studios in California, Toyota's design studio there, which did do this car, and we'll get into that as we go. But this was the true originator of that car, and I suppose, if you considered the LC the new SC, like this one, it would be the third generation after the folding hardtop that came out in '02. But all right, so here it is. In 1992, when this car emerged, Lexus was riding very high on the success of the LS400 sedan. If you remember that thing, that's a car that they had come out with to compete with the Germans, with the S-Class, with the BMW 7, and they did so spectacularly. It cost them $1 billion, which seems like a lot until you realize GM put like $7 billion in the GM10 platform, those Regals and Cutlasses, which did not do well. Lexus got a lot more bang for their buck with the LS, which was an instant success, started selling very well, and made the Japanese company even more arrogant at the time, which was not that easy to do. Acura had come out with a sport coupe based on the Legend, and of course there was the 850 BMW coming out, the 300 CE from Mercedes, and Lexus decided that they wanted a sport coupe. They were actually pretty early to it. Designs of this car started in '87, which is another interesting part of it. But anyway, there's Peter going around in his Kubota, looking for the goats, maybe. I don't know about this gimbal thing. Now it's all floating around. I feel like I'm on the Edmund Fitzgerald or something. I think I'm going to get rid of this thing. I really do. You know what? I'm getting rid of it right now. I can't take it. Hold on a minute. All right, that's much, much better. I don't care if the camera shakes a little bit. At least I can control the damn thing and I don't feel ridiculous. There goes Peter this morning in a Maserati, so he's got to be happy. I remember when he was driving that Fiat 500 and the Toyota Celera, so that's going to make him more chipper to be in a posing Italian sports car. But anyway, back into this thing. So Lexus was riding high on the LS. It had done very, very well. It was outselling everything that they thought it would. Well, maybe they did think it would. They could have been that arrogant, but it was doing well. And they thought they wanted a sports coupe. So they decided to come up with this car, the SC, which, you know, on the nose stands for sport coupe, the way that LS stands for luxury sedan. Toyota was not really putting too much thought into their naming process at the time. And unusually, what they did was give their designers a clean sheet of paper. I mean, so often sedans for these luxury cars are just basically re-engineered two-door versions of the sedan. You know, the Mercedes S-Class does it with the CL, the Acura Legend, which this car purported to compete with at the time, was also, you know, a two-door version of the four-door, and that just sort of was the way it went. So it was very unusual for Lexus to decide to come up with a sedan that was an all-new design. And they gave the plans to Kelty, their design studio in California, which, you know, had had some success, although they had just come out with the Previa, which was Previa, whatever the hell you call it, a very unattractive Toyota minivan that maybe some people liked, but not me. And anyway, they got the nod for this one. And instead of sketching, which is quite normal, they start, you know, drawing sketches. What they did was fill a bunch of balloons with plaster on this car. A very odd way of doing it, and started forming them and shaping them. And once they did that, they scanned and uploaded them into a computer, you know, computer-aided drafting type thing. And they made some clay models of it. And, you know, it was very advanced for the time. This is all very complicated. It's not that complicated, but okay, here we go. So they came up with this design, which was all curvature and unusually non-straight panels. I mean, everything in the 80s was very straight-edged and razor. It reminds me a little bit of the way music was back then. I mean, if you remember in the late 80s, it all became about the cleanness of the music, the recording quality. You know, even on, I think Dire Straits, that Brothers in Arms album, was one of the ultimate clean albums that even put little studio notes on the album jacket about, oh, unwanted hiss on track 7, you know, at 3 minutes, you know, unwanted pop here and there. It was just all about clean. And then in the, oh my God. Anyway, it was just all about clean. And then Nirvana came out, you know, a year or so later with their distorted sound and Marshall tube amps turned up to 11 and knocked everything on its ass. I mean, music went from being this pursuit of perfection in terms of clean recording back to being filthy Marshall tube amps and distortion guitar. And all of a sudden, everybody was trying to do it. Well, when this car was designed, it was kind of the same thing. Most of the stuff out there was all very angled, straight, not very curved. In fact, the original clay models of this car were considered to be unproducible. They just couldn't be made. There were too many curves, too many... they just didn't have the engineering and production capacity to make the design that these people had made. But then you enter a Japanese guy named... this is a tough one. Sahachi Takahashi. Remember right? It's, you know, the Japanese names are hard for me. He loved the design so much that he vowed to come up with ways to produce it, and he did. They came up with all new means of production, machines, changed the headlights, the way that metal could be bent, and came up with the ability to produce the car as produced or as designed by the Kelty Design Studio, and that was this SC400. So this car was radical at the time, absolutely radical. When you see the curvature, I mean, there's a straight line down the side, basically, from the front of the rear fender well back. And that's it. Everywhere else you look, the greenhouse, the rear fenders, the front fenders, everything is curved. Everything is soft and gentle. First of all, very unlike a Japanese car. This car is so unlike a Japanese car in many, many ways, but the curvature was a big part of that. And you really have to hand them some credit for coming up with it. You know, the headlights use these projector beam things so they could be small. They could, you know, look how sort of... Again, this is all common now, but back then it blew everybody away. I mean, the car magazines went absolutely apeshit over this thing with good reason. There just really was nothing else on the road like it. And it found its own niche, which was also unusual for a car like this. I mean, it was more expensive than the Acura Legend that it competed with, but well underneath the Mercedes. The BMW had the 8 Series, which was shockingly expensive, twice the price of this thing. And Mercedes had the 300 CE, and then, of course, the S-Class coupe, which this really didn't compete with, but, you know, it might have attracted the same buyer. But there was nothing at this price point with these statistics, and it sold very well as a result. I mean, it's V8 powered, an all-original sport coupe with independent suspension and a great look, and it did very, very well. And Lexus just carved a niche out where really none existed, and that's pretty rare in the car business. Anyway, so the first work design, it started in '87, the Kelty research. You know, it used some of the stuff off the LS, most notably the engine. But otherwise, what it really did was use the parts off the Supra, which wasn't being made yet. And that's another aspect to this car that bears mentioning. The Mark IV Supra has become incredibly collectible, that car. I mean, in ridiculous figures. This car is essentially a Mark IV Supra, and in fact predated it. I mean, the design of the underpinnings of the Supra were based on this Lexus SC. You know, they used even the same engine, at least in the 6-cylinder version, which came out a year later in '93, the year model of this car, although this is an 8. And most of these things are 8. So very, very important car for Toyota and Lexus. And while the Supra soared... That's a bit of a pun because the Toyota version of this car in Japan was called the Soarer. But anyway, while the Supra soared, the SC did well, carried on for a few years, you know, died off, and really hasn't until recently become notable on the collector market. And we'll get into why as we go. Anyway, I'm going to pause it for one more minute so I can pull forward up to where the sun won't be. All right, so there we go. You know, I know I've been a little bit convoluted this morning. I can blame it in part on this coronavirus whiskey, which I'm still doing despite the the jab I got, which I went into in the last video, and I'm not going to get into again. But I've become used to it. It's become a safety blanket of sorts, and I have no intention of giving it up now. So one of the drawbacks to that, does make me a bit scatterbrained when I say I have this whole thing listed at bulleted points in my brain, and then I just start going all over the place, and it just doesn't work out. What I need is a teleprompter. That would work fantastically well for me. Then I could just organize everything into a nice thing and do an actual proper professionally quality video instead of the lunacy that these things are. But they are what they are, and I'm going to keep going the way I'm going. So here it is. So the thing came out. It was incredibly curved, incredibly rounded, very different, a real departure for Lexus and Japan, and a real departure for what the design was at the time. What Calty did in California was essentially create what would become the key design theme of the 90s, and actually to the point of revulsion. When I look at this car now, I just see something that looks like so many other 90s cars, but you have to remember that this thing predated it and was the inspiration for many of the cars that came afterwards, whether it be little shit boxes like Altimas or Grand Prix, not Grand Prix, whatever. A bunch of cars that came out afterwards were inspired by the design of this Lexus, and it became a theme for the 90s. And I think that there's a couple of reasons why these lagged behind the collector market despite their statistics, and I think one of them was that the 90s seemed kind of bland for cars, a lot of them. Two, that Lexus, being a brand that was invented by Toyota to compete with high-end brands, it was just brought out of thin air. There was no Mr. Lexus building propellers in the 1920s that became a car company. It did not have the 100-year lineage that the Mercedes and BMWs did, and those do help their cars become collectible today. Lexus didn't have that to depend on, and that's why this car sort of became an afterthought for a while. That's over, by the way. These cars are now starting to really skyrocket, particularly because people have realized that they're essentially luxury spec Supras, and the way those cars have gone up is dragging these ones up behind them. And I think that's a good thing, not just because of the Supra, but because this car stands very well in its own right and deserves to be appreciated for what it was. So, clean sheet of paper design, very unusual for a Japanese car at the time, and very unusual for a coupe version of a luxury car like the LS. The way they came up with stuff to make it special, the engineering, the build quality, a very neat story, that goes along with it to match what I think is a very handsome and elegant design. There's a lot of reasons I like this thing, but we'll get into them as we get into the car finally. So anyway, it's coming along. It's starting to become noticed by collectors, which is great. A lot of them, unfortunately, because it lagged for so long, they were cheap on the used car market. They were known to be pretty good cars, and people just bought them and used the crap out of them. So even though they weren't a low production version, a lot of these cars got used up and thrown away, or they're still running around with beat up fenders and 300,000 miles and stuff you wouldn't want. A lot of deferred maintenance, but finding a cream puff has become less easy than it was a few years ago. I mean, initially, the people who bought these things, because they were kind of expensive, were Japanese car purists or people who they had money and they had resources and they kept them well and they garaged them. And, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, there were a plentiful amount of these that were well kept, but that's over. I remember one of these. I won't call it from my youth because we're talking 92, which, God, I was old enough to vote and drink whiskey, but there was a guy down the street who for years had driven a Porsche 911 SC in white, which I thought was a beautiful car, and it meant a lot to me growing up. Then one day, that car was gone, and I see him pull out of his house in one of these, this SC400, which I didn't know what it was at the time, and you know what, that may not be true. I was also reading Car and Driver then, but it sort of implanted something on my brain that said said, you know, okay, this is a pretty special car. For that guy to have given up his 911, who is a real car guy, and get behind the wheel of this thing, yeah, there's something to it. And I tend to agree with him. But real quick, let's sort of do a quick note of 1993 to see what was going on at the time. We'll put the car in the context of that. And damn with the sun. Who cares? The hell with it. As long as the goats don't come out, we're gonna live with the sun. So 93, Bill Clinton was inaugurated. You know, that was interesting. Thank you, Ross Perot, for that. But before he was inaugurated, George Bush, he signed the START II treaty with Boris Yeltsin, which limited nuclear weapons of sorts, but mostly did away with these MIRV things, multiple independent targetable re-entry vehicles, or whatever the hell they were. And you know, what that was basically a first strike weapon, like the October, Red October in that movie, you know, which was designed to approach by stealth and shower its target with independent warheads. The MIRVs were for that. So that was ratified by America in 2000, by the America in 96, by the Soviets in 2000, but then it just went away. They did away with the START II treaty, and it became the SORT treaty, which just limited weapons, and they got to keep their MIRVs. So, you never know what's going to happen. There was also the Mars Observer, which failed miserably. That was a space thing. They shot it off into space. It crashed, probably shot down by aliens, or maybe they let a goat on board. But it died just as it was about to go into orbit around Mars and was a total failure. That cost just about $1 billion, which ironically is what Lexus spent on the LS program, to much better results. So, you know, if you want to get more for your buck, you're probably better off with Toyota than the United States government. There was the Waco Siege, if you remember that. A guy named David Koresh made a joke about Janet Reno entering a beauty contest, and all hellfire rained down on him, and they burned down the Branch Davidian complex in Waco, killed, I don't know, 76 people or something. Very few survived. Janet Reno survived, but not very many of the Branch Davidians. So that was a big deal. And then Canada elected their first female prime minister, a woman named Kim Campbell, which lasted for about 6 months. They really dodged a bullet on that one. Also the last female prime minister, so obviously it didn't go very well for our friends up north. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe they come up with another one. An oil tanker ran aground off the Shetland Islands in the UK, where those little teeny horses are made. You know, as far as, if you remember the teeny horses, it's like Daddy Warbucks would give one to his daughter, you know, on their 4-acre estate in, you know, Manhattan, while homeless people looked through the gate eating sawdust and pigeons. And, you know, if you remember those little horses, none of them were covered with oil or anything, as far as anyone knows. So thank God for that. They weren't harmed in the oil tanker that crashed there. It was a bad year for serial killers. There was a guy named Joel Rifkin. He was caught, I think he killed like 17 sex workers or something in New York and Long Island, but he didn't have a catchy name. You know, none of the backdoor killer or the night intruder or whatever they call those people. So I won't say he's forgotten. I'm sure a lot of his victims' families still remember it, but you know, without the catchy name, it just didn't become a thing like many of the more remembered guys. You know, you had some movies. Jurassic Park came out. That was a pretty big deal. Mrs. Doubtfire, you know, Robin Williams cross-dressing in what would be considered very normal today. The Fugitive, The Firm, In the Name of the Father. That was Daniel Day-Lewis with the IRA thing. That was kind of fascinating. I was actually, the first time I watched that, I was living in Ireland, and it meant nothing to me. Schindler's List, the feel-good movie of the year. And Philadelphia, another great feel-good movie, and Robin Hood, Men in Tights. So, yeah, you know, I don't know. 93 just didn't seem that notable to me in terms of anything. I mean, it just was one of those years, and maybe that's another reason this Lexus SC suffered a little bit. In the mid-year, in 90... Okay, so this SC, the 400, the V8, came out in 92. In 93, the SC300 came out, which had a direct version of the Supra's inline 6, putting out about 225 horsepower. And unlike this V8 version, you could actually get a handshaker in it, a 5-speed manual. But not many people opted for that. I think partially because these cars were pretty expensive at the time, and your average boy racer really didn't buy them. So it was mostly old retired guys who wanted V8s and automatics. So the V8 still outsold it, and I think not even 4,000 stick shift SC300s were made between 93 and 2001 when they went away. So those have a real premium in the collector market. People love those, and the tuners love them because, again, they're essentially a luxury spec Supra. But most of them you're going to see running around are the V8s, and yeah, tell you what, let's just get into the car. Alright, so have a look under the hood. Let's start with that. You know, the curvature of the hood, it's also subtle, and you just don't think of it now, but at the time, yeah, it was a big deal. And so was this a big deal. So 4 liters, the same motor from the LS sedan, which had proved so popular and advanced and pretty motivational. Twin overhead cams, aluminum construction, 250 horsepower, which again doesn't sound like much today, but was very, very respectable for the time. Through a 4-speed electronically controlled transmission. It had traction control, which it's weird you see that up. First time I've ever seen a traction control system mounted on top of the engine. It seems a bit strange, but there it is. And anyway, it was put in here to great success for this car, and works very, very well as the motivator. You can see Dalton's fantastic job of getting rid of the leaves that had fallen on the panel up there, but anyway, that's just the way he rolls. I swear to Christ. You had a double wishbone suspension up front. You had a single wishbone on top and the back with a trailing arm beneath it. Limited slip diff, 4-wheel vented disc brakes with ABS. You know, all the stuff that should be in the car like this. And again, you have to remember the Mercedes would, it was like 60 grand for a 300 CE at the time. The 850 was like 80 grand. And this thing came out, you know, base price under 40, as optioned over 40, but was absolutely radical amount of stuff for the money. A tremendous bargain at the time, just like the Lexus LS sedan. The LS competed with the S-Class for E-Class money, and this car competed with those cars, with the luxury coupes for a lot less. You could argue that the Eldorado was a competitor, but you know, that was front-wheel drive. The Acura Legend's probably more of a direct competitor, but that's also front-wheel drive. A rear-wheel drive version is frankly better, in my opinion, for a luxury coupe. So there just really was nothing else like this car at this price point, and that's why it did pretty well for itself. 250 horsepower again, 260 pound-feet of torque, and all very respectable numbers for the day. It would do 0 to 60, I want to say in the 6s, you know, 6.7. Car and Driver had a test where they got that off. Low 15s for the quarter mile, and you know, it got up and moved. It was very peppy, and you know, a lot of people unfairly consider this car soulless, like a lot of other Lexuses are. And, you know, I am a believer in that. I do think to some extent a lot of Lexuses made have been devoid of a soul. But I don't think this is one of them. And, you know, not just take my word for it, but you can think, you know, again, this is the Supra-based car, or they based the Supra on this car. It is a spirited driver, and that's part of what makes it fun. So, have a look inside the trunk. I even like the rear spoiler. A lot of the car magazines at the time weren't big fans of that. The badging, I don't know. You've got that SC down there, you've got Lexus here, and you've got the L badge in the center of the deck lid. I think it could have benefited from having a little less badging on the back. But a beautiful, nice big trunk, plenty of room for children, toddlers. You know, even you could probably get into some pre-adolescents in there. Your 8 or 9-year-olds are probably going to fit okay. They're not going to be able to play the CD player there, but yeah, you can put in an iPad or something for them to amuse themselves themselves while you're going to the grocery store or wherever it is you go. So there's a full-size spare tire underneath the Lexus mat here. Let's see if we can get into that. Yeah, there it is under all that stuff. You see your toolkit jack, all that stuff. And again, typical Lexus quality and design. It's just so perfect and nice. And, you know, this is never going to collapse. It just, they do such a nice job. They were arrogant enough at the time. They're as arrogant as the Germans were. Have a look inside. Okay, here's something absolutely fascinating about this car. Maybe the most fascinating part of this car, in my mind, are the door hinges. If you remember the CL Mercedes, the S-Class, which came out in 2000, it had very similar hinges, and people mistakenly think they might have been the first of their kind, but they are not. This is like a 9-piece hinge with 4 joints that moves the door forward and up like that to create ease of access, although I'm not sure it completely worked at that. I wish the door opened a little bit wider. But weirdly, you could put the door in a variety of different locations and it would just stay there unless the car was on an angle. And then it won't. So maybe I'd drive up and do that. But anyway, it was a very fascinating bit of over-engineering at the time. And I think another part of what adds to the collectability of the car now, because it's just neat and it wasn't done. And frankly, this door hinge system was more complicated than the rear suspension on most pickup trucks in the 1990s. I mean, it is a very convoluted design that works quite well. Lexus put wood trim in it, which they didn't initially on the LS models. That was a complaint some people had. Real wood trim, looks nice. Your power windows. Never been a big fan of early Lexus switchgear. It just feels too Corolla-ish to me. You know, it's not fancy at all. But the thing about it is it works, it stays working, it doesn't break, and it works, you know, permanently, so you got to give it credit for that. Leather wrapped stuff here, and a nice little gun storage pouch at the bottom of the door. You know, all very handsome. Okay, we're going to go around the other side to get in the rear seat because it has that move forward thing, which I will show you. So when we lift this guy forward, it's going to drag the seat up. And again, this was fairly new at the time. It happens now a lot. But, you know, you had pretty good back seats. Your Canadians are going to be fairly chipper back there. They have reasonable footroom. They have pretty good headroom, even with the optional sunroof this has. They kind of sink into this beautiful soft leather. And Lexus did put really nice leather in these cars. There in the package shelf, you can see 3 of the speakers it's got. It's got a pretty fancy sound system, and everyone is going to be reasonably happy in the back of the car. These big doors that go into the roof are kind of interesting as well. Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my crap in the trunk, and we'll just go on a test drive, so bear with me a minute. You know, one really pissed off bird up there. Actually see a bunch of bees as well. I'm telling you, this place is just a nightmare of animals, an absolute nightmare. There's goats out. Thank God they didn't come back, although I'm tempted to go find them like in a safari, but anyway, maybe later. Let's fire this thing up. I do love Lexus's backlit gauges at the time. That was a pretty, yeah, it was again pretty radical. It doesn't look like anything now. It could be in a, you know, modern Corolla, but back then it was kind of a big deal with the red needles and the backlighting that was just black when it was turned off. So that was all kind of cool. And okay, so now we're going to get into some of the stuff that I really particularly like about this car. And let me tell you, it's not that easy for me to talk about how much I like a Toyota product from the 90s, because frankly, I just find most of them incredibly boring and generic. But I do think Lexus engineered a little bit of soul into this car. More than soul, what they engineered into this car was what luxury was really about at the time, and also in the 1980s, which was build quality, materials, reliability. I mean, today it's not luxury unless you've got a 43-inch TV screen in the center of the dashboard. Back then, you could have this very simple-looking dash that, you know, was just incredibly well built and did what it was supposed to do. Even this little tricky, silly cup holders kind of neat. But you had wood trim. Unfortunately, that wood goes a little bit milky in some of these things, which it has in this one. 93, you had 2 airbags. 92, only 1. And there are very few gimmicks with this car. It was just all about the ergonomics, the quality of the material. The leather on the steering wheel is astounding. It's gorgeous. The leather on the seats is nice. The leather you rest up against here is nice. Everything about it, the switch gear, even if I'm not a big fan of how it looks, the feeling of it is perfect, and the way it lasts and the way it's built is perfect. This is neat. It's got this auto-dimming mirror, which you can see. Look at that. That's kind of cool. It reminds me of the Magic Sky in the Mercedes, which is a big deal now. Also got some mist on the back from Dalton's crappy window cleaning job. But that's a pretty cool feature. I like that. You've got a power tilt wheel, works with the memory seats, which again, you know, that was all high-end stuff at the time. You've got climate control here with very simple knobs. You don't have all kinds of strange digital interfaces like you have now. You have this premium sound radio. Bowie, you know, you can't really go wrong with that in the morning, although I'm not sure about his 80s stuff. But anyway, 200 or so watts, 6 or 7 speakers, you know, cassette and CD changer in the back, all very nice stuff. This 4-speed ECT-I transmission, electronically controlled, overdrive button on the side, no shifting paddles to bang your way through. You really didn't need them. The car always knew what gear to be in. You could set it for power or normal. We're going to leave it normal for the moment. You know, some people complain they'd rather have another notch on the shifter than a button on the side, but whatever. I think that's a pretty small and miserable complaint. You did have an ashtray because people did still smoke then. You had a glove box here. We've got the original books. This thing, again, has been so well kept. Some more service records in there. A little place to set down your drugs or cocaine or whatever it is you had back in the 90s. This one came with all the service records, which is nice, the kind of stuff you want to see. And again, part of why I bought it. And we do have the original window sticker. So here you can see it had a base price of $41,900, which is more than I thought, actually, in 93. It must have gone up. And with options was $46,000. So traction control was $1,600. That seems kind of shocking. CD changer, $900. A lot of the stuff was expensive. And the rear spoiler was $300. There you can see it was diamond white pearl. And I'm not sure, what do they don't give you the interior color. Beige, neutral, it doesn't matter. Anyway, nice to see all that with it, along with a big stack of records and whatnot. So that's always a nice way to buy a used car. And the leather on the seats is just lovely. You have another cup holder here in the back. On the center console, I have my beloved cassette adapter, so we're going to put on some great music here as we drive away. But we'll get into that in a minute. You could turn your traction control if you wanted to kick the rear drive out in the corners, which is a nice feature. You got heated seats here, you know, leather on the e-brake. And again, volume. I mean, the one complaint I might have is I've gone to turn the volume down 50 times, and I've put the AC up to 900 degrees. Hard to tell the difference between those two buttons, but either way, I am thankful and appreciative to have knobs. I like the oh shit handles on the A-pillar. I think that's kind of a cool spot for him. Again, because Japan is right-hand drive, they just went ahead and left him on both sides, which I think is neat. Then you have this optional glass sunroof, which of course still works flawlessly because of 1993 Lexus design and build quality, but otherwise everything as it should be. I'm gonna get a little bit of AC going. Oh my god, got a fan that would blow you down. I don't know why that fan seems to change the mode. Turn that down a little bit. Seems like a very high fan for first speed. In fact, I can turn that off for a minute. That's too much fan. And let's go for a spin. You know, the car has so much sound deadening that it actually is quite quiet inside. It's a shame because the V8 makes an awesome noise outside the car. I would like to hear a little bit more of that inside the car. Let's see if I can rev it up. Probably does nothing. Yeah, got a nice little growl to it. But outside the car, it's going through twice pipes, and yeah, I think it sounds a little bit better. But again, this is luxury to me. This is the ergonomics are nice, the materials are nice. You feel incredibly comfortable in these seats, ready to take on a long distance drive, which is what basically a grand touring car is all about. It is for long distance driving. Windshield, yeah, you know, for Dalton it could be worse. It's not good, but it could be worse. I'll tell you what, the sun's too much, so I'll just wait to the end of the road and we'll pick it up again. All right, so here it is, you know, 28 years later, 87,000 miles, and this car still feels tight. Listen to that. I mean, man, if only it had a little less sound deadening. This car still feels nice, tight, together, responsive. I don't feel any clunks. I don't feel any rattles. It is just an epic, epic build quality that this thing has, which makes it amazing. It just makes it amazing. And because it's becoming collectible, it's now a collectible car that you can drive. I mean, they're not hugely expensive to maintain. You know, everything on them is fairly reasonable. They built that LS for so many years that there's lots of mechanical aftermarket parts. They made enough of them that you can get a lot of used body parts and such, even if they're not still making them. So you know, the support is out there, and what an amazing car to be able to drive you know, to work and back, to take on a trip. I mean, you've got something that's essentially collectible, not very yet, but increasingly so, and you really don't mind driving it the next town over or across the country. And not only do you not mind doing it, it would actually make it. I mean, where is the negativity in that? So it is really nice to see this car aging and becoming appreciated for what it is, which was an amazingly well-built quality product with driving excitement, fantastic suspension, excellent engine, excellent transmission, lovely steering, lovely brakes. It was a driver's car, and you know, unquestionably so. More soul than most of the cars coming out of Lexus at the time, much more soul. You know, in 02 they went to that SC400, which I do like. I think that's a neat car, but it's not got the same sporty vibes that this car has. You have to skip that generation and get to the LC to feel that. But anyway, there it is. This is a 93 Lexus SC400 coupe. It's going to be for sale at Auto House of Naples, 239-263-8500, on the web at autohousenaples.com. I'm enjoying driving it. This is another one that I'm going to regret selling. Be a nice one. I wish I had a big building like Peter with 30 cars in it. I'd have, oh God, so many cars I'd like to own have slipped through my fingers, which is just a shame. It's just a shame. I'm going to sit back and have something else to regret and resent as an old man, which I'm almost there. But anyway, thank you very much for having a look. Appreciate it. Sorry for just the single video this week. And sorry it's been much convoluted. I can feel it already. I mean, I've had the camera on and off 9 times. This is going to be all clipped together, disjointed. Maybe I need to cut back on that Corona whiskey in the morning. It's probably becoming a bit much. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate it. And we will see you with the next one. Take care. State troopers behind me, I should probably just stick to 78. So there it is. That's what you get. I was really gonna bump this one up. Anyway.